Now, the letters this week between former Governor-General Sir John Kerr and the Palace in the lead up to the dismissal of the then Australian Prime Minister Gough Whitlam were released for the first time. It's reignited debate on whether Australia should be a republic. To see just how far some Labor MPs have gone in this discussion, here's Matt Thistlethwaite, he's federal Labor MP, when I interviewed him a couple of days ago on this show.
Are independent enough as a country to run our own affairs and our own democracy, and finally look at appointing one of our own as our head of state and becoming a republic. You're starting to get into the territory where Australia is having to seek assurances and consult a foreign power to make decisions about our democracy. And I don't think that that represents modern Australia.
And Matt went on to argue that this amounted to foreign interference, just quite extraordinary. I spoke a bit earlier today with the Australian's lead historian and journalist Troy Bramston, who's been following these revelations and reporting on them for years as well closely. Here's what he had to say. Troy, historian Jenny Hocking fought for the release of the Palace letters. She said repeatedly they would show that the Queen knew about the plans for dismissal. She now maintains they were every bit the bombshell they promised to be. Troy, do her claims stand up to scrutiny?
Well, Sharri, I should start by saying that it's terrific that these letters have been finally released. They give an important insight into the dismissal, the views coming from Government House and also from Buckingham Palace, but they do not provide the evidence that was claimed that they would, that the Queen in fact knew about the dismissal in advance and approved it afterwards. There's simply no evidence for that in the letters, and in fact it's very clear that in John Kerr's letter to Sir Martin Charteris, the Queen's private secretary, he says on the 11th of November that he deliberately did not tell the Queen in advance because he did not want to involve her in the dismissal. And then in a reply from Charteris on the 17th of November, he says, "Thank you for not informing the Queen in advance. This was your responsibility, this was your role, and it was up to you to decide what to do." And there's no real indication either in the letters that the Palace wholeheartedly endorsed Kerr's action.
Many this week have argued the Palace letters strengthen the case for a republic. Labor has even said that this amounted to foreign interference in Australian politics. Does this in any way, Troy, amount to foreign interference?
Sharri, I think those claims are a ridiculous stretch. I mean, the Queen is our head of state. The Governor-General is the Queen's representative in Australia. It is completely and utterly unremarkable that the Governor-General should be writing to the Queen about the greatest political crisis in Australian history, surveying the terrain, analysing the personalities, canvassing possible options to resolve the deadlock and receiving replies. Now, there are a lot of letters. They are voluminous, they are extensive, and I do think that Kerr probably writes too much and reveals too much information and asks for too much information in return. But that is the nature of the relationship. I mean, the Governor-General is the Queen's representative in Australia, and if he can't write to her and her staff about what's happening in Australian politics, then who can he write to? I've actually seen the letters of other Governors-General to the Queen, some which haven't been made public yet, and they are just as interesting and revealing and indiscreet about political matters as John Kerr was throughout 1975. On the question of a republic, I support a republic. I've always supported a republic. I think we should become a republic one day. But I think the idea that we're somehow going to be blaming the Queen for the dismissal in 1975 and saying she must therefore pay some kind of price by Australia becoming a republic is a nonsense argument. And if we want to become a republic in this country, we're not going to get there by attacking the monarchy and inventing conspiracy theories about 1975. We need to make the case on a much broader basis, appealing to a wide range of Australians and arguing other reasons for becoming a republic, not simply an attack on the Queen.
Well, is there now a precedent for those other letters you refer to from other Governor-Generals to the Queen to be made public? And are they in the public interest?
Yeah, I do. Yes, I do think it should be it is in the public interest that these further letters are released. I mean, I praise Jenny Hocking for taking this matter to the High Court. I always supported her court action, called for the letters to be released around a decade or so ago, and the High Court made the right decision in determining that these letters, these vice-regal letters, are public documents, official documents, so they're not private or personal records, and therefore they should be released just like any other cabinet paper or internal departmental document after 20 or 30 years. So yes, more letters should be released. That is in the public interest. We have a right to know. The Governor-General is a public office holder in this country, and any documents that pass his desk are therefore in the public interest that they be disclosed in a reasonable amount of time, usually 20 years now for cabinet papers, and I see no reason why that rule shouldn't apply also to vice-regal correspondence.
Troy, you have a remarkable story in the paper today where you've interviewed the Queen's former Assistant Private Secretary, Sir William Heseltine, about what the Queen's advice would have been had Kerr asked for advice. What advice did he say the Queen may have given?
Yeah, so William Heseltine is a remarkable man. He's an Australian born in Fremantle. He turns 90 today. He was at Buckingham Palace as the Queen's Assistant Private Secretary in 1975. He received the call from Government House that Gough Whitlam had been dismissed, the first person in the palace to hear the news, and he later became the Queen's Private Secretary during Bob Hawke's Prime Ministership. And he revealed today that if John Kerr had have asked the Queen for advice or had have flagged his intention to dismiss Gough Whitlam, the palace would have cautioned him to delay. They would have said you need to procure a political solution to this crisis and would have been very, very cautious about recommending that he use the exercise of the reserve powers to dismiss the Prime Minister. And you know what, Sharri, that is consistently in the letters. There's a remarkable letter which people can see from the 4th of November 1975. This is from Buckingham Palace to John Kerr, and in that letter they say the reserve power should only be used as a last resort, and they viewed the crisis in Australia as political, not constitutional, therefore not requiring an intervention from the Governor-General like the decisive one he gave only a week later after this letter. So they say only use those powers when there is demonstrably no other course that they should be used. So my interview with Sir William Heseltine confirmed that. He said that is exactly their view. It didn't change before, it didn't change after.
Do you agree with that assessment? As a historian yourself, was Kerr justified in the decision he took to dismiss the government or not?
I think John Kerr was in a very difficult position. I think he's an interesting personality, an ambitious guy, wanting to make his mark in Australian politics. He's fascinated by the reserve powers. I think the two other principal actors, Malcolm Fraser, was utterly ruthless, torching conventions, shattering precedents, pushing the political system to the brink. I think Gough Whitlam made a number of blunders throughout the crisis and in response to it. But at the end of the day, I didn't support and I don't support the way Gough Whitlam was dismissed. I think a dismissal conceived in secret, deceiving the Prime Minister and executing it by ambush, by surprise, was a mistake. I mean, it may have been a likely resolution that the Parliament had to be dissolved for an election, but I think that John Kerr should have given Gough Whitlam a warning, a caution, and that is in fact in keeping with historical precedent. There's a great book called The English Constitution written by Walter Bagehot, who says that the Crown has a role in warning and cautioning Prime Ministers, and that is what John Kerr did. In fact, he did the opposite. He didn't do that. He did the opposite. He executed the dismissal by ambush and gave Gough Whitlam no other option.
Thank you so much for your time, Troy.